Hey guys, Archifantes here with another Prismata game analysis. Today's replay is a neat little game involving a Plasmafier Rush and a Tia Thurnax counter rush. So both of these are very aggressive units that can sort of ramp up damage out of nowhere. You can just suddenly have like 7 extra damage on your turn. Because of that, obviously the set is going to be a very sharp set. We're gonna see a couple turns where nothing happens, and then all of a sudden they'll just be like 10 or 15 damage. However, the aggression is moderated by the presence of Infusion Grid. Infusion Grid costs the same as a wall, but has 1 more HP, which is just insanely efficient in terms of defense. Obviously, the drawback of Infusion Grid is it does not have prompt, so you have to buy it 1 turn earlier. But provided you plan ahead, Infusion Grid is an amazing unit that allows you to sort of just slow down rushes. A player with Infusion Grid can defend aggressive rushes with less resources than a player just defending with walls and force fields. And by using less resources, you're able to allocate those resources into doing other things, such as buying offense, whereas the player defending with walls and force fields might just be forced to buy defense every single turn and not much else. So the presence of Infusion Grid will sort of moderate the Tia Thurnax and Plasmafier, and as we'll see, will play a major role in this game. Other units of note are Flame Animus, which just allows you to sort of streamline your Tia Thurnax build. You can get a Blast Forge, get a Flame Animus, maybe a couple Immolites and Tarsiers, and eventually pump out a Tia Thurnax. There's also Zamora, which I don't really think is good in this set, because your opponent can just punish you with, say, an Immolite Rush with Tia Thurnax, or something like that. That being said, there may be a build available with just Infusion Grid. You might be able to turtle long enough to actually get out your Zamora and eventually take over the game. I don't know. Neither myself nor my opponent want for this unit. Going into the game, we'll see a couple turns of not much going on, and that's because both players are just setting up. And a couple turns in, we'll just see both players sort of explode with damage. I go for Conduit first because it's a Tia Thurnax set. Tia Thurnax in general is just an immense amount of pressure, and it's generally a good idea to be able to threaten it. Even if you don't buy Tia Thurnax itself, just the threat of being able to add 7 damage on any given turn is enough to sort of make your opponent play in certain ways. So opponent of course also goes Conduit. Because he's player 1, he does have a sort of delay on his build. I'm able to get my Blast Forge first, which allows me to get a Flame Animus first, which forces my opponent to sort of buy a wall instead of his own Flame Animus or maybe an Infusion Grid or something. This does buy me time to buy my own Infusion Grid since he has no offense. And at this point, my opponent does something very interesting. He goes for an Infusion Grid and a Blast Forge, and then just floats 8 gold. And this leaves my opponent exactly enough gold to buy double Plasmafier on his following turn. I wasn't too concerned at this point because I had my Infusion Grid. Double Plasmafier is 8 damage total, and I would be able to defend with a wall. So I just go ahead and buy a Tarsier and then a Flame Animus on my turn. Opponent does go for the double Plasmafier, and again, because of Infusion Grid, I'm just not under as much pressure as I would be if I only had walls. Like here, I can just buy a wall, an Immolite, another Tarsier, and then a Blast Forge. The Blast Forge obviously is to buy Infusion Grids. I'm gonna need to buy like Wall Infusion Grid for a couple turns. And you know, if I didn't have Infusion Grid here, I would be forced to buy like a Barrier or a Force Field and forego buying an extra Engineer or something like that. The reason I bought the Immolite here, besides the fact that it works so well with my gold, is because it allows me to get 5 damage. Because my opponent has Infusion Grid, which absorbs 3, if I were to attack for 4 damage, I would only be able to kill an Engineer. With Immolite, I'd be able to kill 2 Engineers. So this sorta kinda doubles my damage for this turn, which makes it very, very attractive. Opponent is just going to deal 8 damage to me, which I'm able to defend. But at this point, defense is a bit tight. I only have 5 defense with Infusion Grid Engineer, so I'm gonna have to buy a wall, force field, barrier. And here I realized that if I don't do anything, my opponent will just be able to stack damage until eventually I won't be able to defend. Infusion Grid's okay at holding off 2 Plasmafiers, but if you were to say get like a third Plasmafier and then start just spamming Gauss Cannons and Steel Splitters, I would probably just crumble under the pressure. There's no way for me to defend like 16 or 18 damage reasonably. So I realized I needed to apply pressure to my opponent. 5 damage is just not enough since my opponent has Infusion Grid. He can just buy whatever he wants. So here I actually make the decision to go for a Tia Thurnax. And Tia Thurnax will give me a massive spike of damage. It'll bring my damage up to 12, which is even higher than my opponent's. And I actually decide to cancel the force field and barrier here. That's debatable. On hindsight, I don't think that was a good idea. Basically, I wanted to just soak up 3 on Tia Thurnax. This does lose me the Infusion Grid, which significantly reduces my defense potential for the next turn. So in hindsight, I probably would have left up the force field and the barrier. I don't know. I didn't really think about it as much as I probably should have during the actual game. So 10 damage, I'm able to defend with Infusion Grid, Wall, Tia, and I just swing for 12 damage. So notice, just the fact that I bought the Tia Thurnax meant my opponent was forced to not buy more offense, right? Even though he could defend with Wall Barrier alone, he needed to preemptively buy the Infusion Grid and the Engineer instead of, say, buying a Gauss Cannon or buying a Steel Splitter or something. And there was certainly no way for him to buy his third Plasmafier. And that is indeed what I intended to accomplish. On my turn, I buy a Wall, a Force Field, and an Infusion Grid. And then I just attack. He's going to be doing 10 damage every turn. But as we'll begin to see, with Infusion Grids, I can actually comfortably defend 10 damage without much problem. And my opponent and I are actually even on drone count at this point, and that's because the Plasmafier has been firing for a couple turns now. Tia Thurnax initially cost more drones, right? It cost 7, but after like 4 turns of firing, the Plasmafier will actually sort of level out with the Tia Thurnax and eventually be more expensive. We'll see in future turns that the Plasmafier drawback will actually be very, very relevant. I'm able to defend by going a force field here. I could have bought a Wall or something, but I wanted to get out double Infusion Grid. And that's because from this point forward, I can actually defend his damage with just buying 2 Infusion Grids every turn. My defense is actually very comfortable in this position. Of course, my Tia Thurnax did run out of charges, so I'll be down to, again, 5.5 damage with the Immolite. But as we'll begin to see, the Plasmafires just start killing my opponent's economy way too fast for him to catch up. Okay, at this position, my Tia Thurnax runs out. But let's look at the game state. Opponent has 6 drones, I have 10 drones. Opponent is losing 2 drones every single turn. If he doesn't fight the Plasmafires, he has 3 damage. I have 5.5 damage with Immolite, and I'm in a very good position to continue buying damage. Once he runs out of drones, I can just spam Tarsiers and then eventually overtake the game. So at this point, the game is actually won for me. And we'll just fast forward through the next couple turns. Eventually, he just runs out of drones and throws in the towel. So I hope you guys enjoyed this game. I'll be back next week with another episode.